We are live for NFL Week number 9 here on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. In this video, we'll be talking about every game, every side, every total, everything that you need to know before you make any bets for NFL Week number 9. Appreciate everybody for stopping by bright and early at 9 a.m. Pacific here on this Wednesday morning. If you're watching after the fact and you have any questions about any of the games, down in the comment section below, be sure to leave them. If you're watching in the live chat, very good morning to you. I'll check in on everybody just shortly, but I want to say some of these live streams have got very game heavy. We've gone for an hour 20, hour and a half, and have kind of neglected the Q&A side of this, which is really what made the stream so popular a season ago. So there's going to be a bit of a extra effort to do some more Q&A during these live streams about the games, about betting, about anything that you want to know in general. And I'll be focusing a little bit more on that as we go forward week by week. Not going to take away from the game talk, but I think at times, based on feedback that I've been getting, that element of the show has been missed a little bit. So just keep that in mind. If you're watching along this morning, you can jump in the live chat on the right-hand side, and you can leave any questions you want, and I'll do my best to get to as many as possible during the show. Rich says, good morning. It's a very busy Wednesday. Rich, it's always a busy Wednesday during the NFL season. Dice Capital back for another show. Good morning. Halfway through rocking week number 9. We're almost there. This is a wild comment. I was shocked to see this. Beautiful day here in Winnipeg. I didn't know that could happen. I did not know that could happen, especially in October. And I'm looking up the weather right now because I kind of don't believe you. It is 3 degrees. That is pretty nice for Winnipeg. You're right. Wow. I hope everything is going okay in Winnipeg. You are settling into quite the time of the year. But as someone from that area of the country and someone that's heading back to that part of the country very soon, I don't want to downplay it too much because it's getting back into it as well. Kevin says, miserable weather here in Texas. The contrast in the live stream, too warm for hunting season. When does deer season start in Texas, Kevin? Curious to know about that as well. Too warm. That sure sounds nice. Good morning to Jay Nava. Connor, will get to the Richardson question against the Vikings once we get to that game. That's a good one for sure. Michael says, time to get this train back on the tracks. Week 7 and 8. I don't think anything could happen in either week. It has been 2 very, very bad weeks in a row. And that brings us to the NFL service record for the season, 34-29-2. Disappointing considering where things were just a couple of weeks ago. Hopefully, as Michael said, this gets back on the track and we get moving forward. But yes, it's been a tough 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks. Hopefully we get things sorted out as well. Justin C. says, good to see the show back on the stream. Good morning to you. Same with Sean, Brian, Bruce, Jeff, Mike D. back as well. Finally made it for one calendar block success. With the calendar as full as yours, I'm surprised that you have time to do anything and anywhere. He's getting ready for New York weather. Game 5 in the Bronx. We're also seeing Julian and Kevin back for another show as well. Riley Carroll, who's in the middle of deer season out in Alberta, talking of which, for those folks down in Texas as well. Certainly that time of year. Rifle season, says Kevin, starts November 2nd, just around the corner. Big weekend for you between football and everything else going on. All right, let's start with it. I see a Jeff question about specific prices on 3 and 3.5. Jeff, the 3-1-10 is better in that question specifically as you're looking at that comparison. Carr, I see a couple team-specific questions. I see one for Seattle. Drop that in once we get to the game. I'll be glancing back and forth. So on the fourth, the final game here on the stream, I'll ask about the Seahawks defense. You have a question. Can you explain your personal preference to almost always playing overs? It's not intentional. It's really more style-driven in terms of what is looked for when handicapping, what is looked for in the information that is sourced. You'll see a lot of unders coming from guys who specifically rely on a lot of math and models, and they're looking at numbers and they're betting solely on that. When you see someone like me that is much more on the subjective side, much more game watching, much more info driven, looking at different sources as well as sourcing different models for prices, more so than creating them, that's always going to lead more to betting on things that will happen or are expected to happen, which tends to skew more towards overs. I wouldn't say it's 100% exclusively that way, but that's just really a style and a focus thing that leads into that difference. And that's why you see those things come out in that way. Ryan says, thanks for all the great info. Glad you're enjoying it. What is home field worth this year? between 1 and 1.5 for the majority of teams. There's a handful of teams: Minnesota, Green Bay, Kansas City. Missing a couple off the top of my head that'll skew higher. A couple that are much lower: Chargers, Raiders, Carolina on the lower end. And there's a lot of different week-to-week manual adjustments that will be made if you have certain teams going into certain climates, certain conditions. Those will be different, and just have a bit of a manual adjustment. But a good baseline is right around that 1.5 point mark for the home field advantage that you're looking at. Couple more coming in as well as I look at this. Ian says a hook is worth 10. That's not necessarily true. It depends on the number. What is the best place to find drive logs for NFL and college? Easily ESPN.com in the play-by-play in the drop-down menu. It's the easiest to navigate. It resizes to the windows if you're moving windows around. It's chronological. It's easy to go, and you don't have many ads to deal with like some other sites. So that's definitely the spot to go to, is the ESPN play-by-play. Brian, why are 10-point teasers absolute bankroll killers? I don't have many thoughts on the specifics of it, but it really comes down to what price you're looking at for those 10-point teasers and just what range of numbers that you can cover. And so that tends to be part of the issue that you might be looking at. Last one, Prabjot says, I said you're moving away from White Rock. I am still going to be on the West Coast, best coast for watching sports. I love the Pacific time zone for watching sports, but going back to the prairies in the later portion of the winter as well. Bit of a life change coming up in the next 4 to 5 months. Less than that now. I guess we're getting close to November. All right, let's get to the game number one. Houston on the road at the New York Jets. Jets -2 total in this game, 41.5. There's 42s on the board, probably on the low end with the 41.5. I see it at Chris. I see it at Jazz. I see it at a couple other books as well, but you can call it 41.5. 42 might be the number that you see at the book. I do not have an opinion on the total. When I'm looking at the side for the Jets -2, I want to bet on the Jets, but the price is a little bit steeper right now this morning. So this is going to be a game I probably end up staying away from. I saw Florio was tweeting about it. We're going to see so much about this game today and tomorrow come out about why in the world are the Jets favored. It's going to be just pounded home by sports betting media. This is the right price. This is now like kind of stretching what the Jets should be in this game. When it was pick -1, I felt that was right. If we think about aggregate ratings, we've seen the Texans at most 2 points better than the Jets over the course of the season. If we're looking at market ratings, we get to right at this number, and you're thinking about home field advantage like we just talked about. You're adding it in. I mean, you're getting the Jets -1, -1.5 pretty well anywhere that you go and you look at that are trusted for ratings and what you're getting to. The only time you get to an argument that would say that this line is too much or the wrong team is favored is if you're looking at standings, if you're looking at power ratings that look at standings and go backwards. And then, of course, you're going to get to an argument where Houston is favored, but it's just a number that's set where it is. And now you have this big difference of opinion that is rising on social because the Jets are viewed as a team that has done nothing right and has been a failure all season. And the Texans are viewed more so as the team that they were last year, which neither of those is quite the reality. And that's not a biased opinion that I'm probably going to get criticized for in the chat. It's just the truth. I mean, any advanced stats, if you're looking at like Ben Baldwin charts, if you're looking at stuff from Steven Ruiz and other guys that aggregate a lot of numbers on a weekly basis and tweet about it, the Jets are dead middle of the league in all of these stats for net EPA, net success. You think about the last couple games that the Jets have had at least 5.9 yards per play the last 3 weeks. The defense continues to struggle and underperform relative to what they should be. And in this game where they don't have both starting safeties and they will very likely be without CJ Mosley in the middle, that's a problem. But on the other side of the football, it's the Houston Texans offense, which is not anywhere close to what it was a year ago and is right now being propped up by Joe Mixon. As we talked about the Jets being at 5.9 yards per play or better the last 3 weeks, the Texans have been 5.8 yards per play or worse the last 3 weeks. And it's really a big contrast in opinion between these two teams and what they're putting forth on the field. When I think about how the Texans have gone about CJ Stroud's career attacking zone coverage, which they could see a decent amount of against the New York Jets. It's been a lot of Nico Collins. He's not there, and that takes away from the effectiveness of the offense. That's not new. It's certainly priced in at this point. But now you take away Stephon Diggs, it makes Tank Dell against these physical corners that the Jets have on the outside in a lot more of a difficult matchup than what he typically would be. And so this is probably a game for Houston where they rely on the ground game a little bit more than usual, and that's not making for a very explosive offense that's just been quite limited in the last few weeks without their star wide receiver. And I think it's going to be limited even further without wide receiver number 2 out there on the field as well. So the Texans continue to be pressured at a very high rate. We'll see if the Jets can exploit that and cause some issues for Stroud in the pocket. But this is not that wrong team favored massive difference like it's going to be made out to be on social. And I think that that's kind of the important thing to take away as you're watching the news and media in the next couple of days, that this price is where it should be. And so would love, there was a way to bet on the Jets here, but at the price, I cannot do it. Lots of questions coming in, guys. Appreciate those continuing to go in. Bill, we'll get to the Falcons-Cowboys game in a couple of minutes. Tim, that app is no longer working. If you're interested in anything, you can head over to bettingtalk.com. Justin says NFL is much harder to bet than college football. That really depends on what your setup is. Michael says, would you like teasing Houston? Jets have difficulty winning by margin because of pacing. It's a good point about the pace. They obviously play very slowly with Aaron Rodgers leading the offense. I believe that Houston is going to be quite a popular teaser leg. I would expect Cleveland to be the most popular this week. I would think there's a lot of teasers tied from Cleveland into Houston as well. We'll get on that Cleveland game in a second where I like the Chargers, but I wouldn't have too many reservations about teasing Houston aside from the fact that their offense has been quite limited in the last couple of weeks and could be more so without Diggs. So I would just keep that in mind as you're looking at this. Jayhawk says, seems like Jets coaching staff will not be able to handle a short week like this. So it goes two ways. The best game of the season that they have played was on a short week against the New England Patriots. It was the best they looked on both sides of the ball by a mile. Now, different situation as you have a new head coach who came in from the defensive coordinator side, but how much does that first game that they already went through it negate this spot historically where teams tend to struggle on their first Thursday night game? Something to consider. Off the top of my head, I don't remember if the Houston Texans played on Thursday last season. So is this a first short week for that staff? Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but it might actually be the opposite in this. I don't really know how to quantify the Jets' new staff going into this spot in new roles. Jeff Ulbrich said this week he's still going to continue to call the defensive plays to maintain continuity. But what I would say to this is, yes, you're right to an extent, but the counterpoint would be that they just did it 3 weeks ago and it's the best they've looked all season. So someone has to look up that Houston stat for me. I'm curious if they did play a Thursday night game last week with the new stat, or last season, pardon me. New England on the road at the Tennessee Titans. So I have Tennessee 3 minus 20. That's the price that I see at Circa. That is the price I see at Pinnacle. That is the price I see at Bet Online. That is the price I see at FanDuel. If you go into the alternates, as it's 3.5 even money. Same thing at DK. Chris is kind of the exception, 3.5 minus 105. You have to pay a little bit more to get to the 3. This is a game where I have bet Tennessee minus 3, minus 20. I think it's one of my top sides of the week because we'll get to a few more as we go through the show. This is one I've talked about on the podcast a couple days so far this week. It's also one I talked about yesterday in some media as well. To me, this is a solid spot. That's kind of a classic handicapping spot for the Titans at home that we just haven't seen a lot of so far this season. Numbers have been really good at adjusting to over or under performances in the week prior. And this is a spot where I feel like the Titans are being a little bit shortchanged. They obviously got blown out on the scoreboard by the Lions, but what might have been missed in that performance was the Titans offense finally got clicking. More than 400 yards of offense on the road in Detroit. And that was a game post-Hopkins. It was a game where Ridley was finally involved. I think there's some promising things to take away from that for the Titans offense that the league has been waiting on, especially the fantasy guys, my goodness, for 3 months now, since all of the preseason hype started in August. We got nothing from them in September. At the end of October, we finally see them show through. Now, the Pats defense has not been performing nearly to the level that was expected. And in that game against the Jets, again, we just mentioned they concede 5.9 yards per play after being called out by their head coach. So the response to being called out was struggling defensively against the New York Jets. The issue is they get away with the win 25-22, which is pretty incredible considering the Jets did not turn the ball over. ESPN stats showed, based on the box score, how much the Jets gained, what the yards per play was, no turnovers. There were a few other qualifiers. Teams that fit the category that the Jets played into were like 758-0 in the last 758 games. And the Jets were the one exception, and the Pats were the one exception to win. And so when we think about the look-ahead price for this game, we were at Tennessee minus 3.5. We're almost back to that now. We're sitting slightly lower than that. And the Pats have a disrupted week of prep. If it is going to be Drake May, who was concussed, is going through the protocol. He is not a full participant at practice. He's not able to accelerate through it. He has to follow the day by day. And I think that makes it tougher for a QB to be 100%, not physically. There is some lingering concerns about that, but not physically, but just prep and readiness for that week when the practice is altered to the extent that it is. And so the one concern you don't really have with Tennessee on a weekly basis is the defense. If anything, it's the offense and the special teams. But if it's a Pats offense that's been lackluster at best all season against the Titans defense, that's a positive. And I think this is a spot where the Titans offense continues not to maybe the level that they looked last week against the Lions, but enough here to outscore the Pats. And so the fact that this was adjusted down with the Pats week of disrupted prep, with the Titans being shortchanged a little bit here, I like Tennessee at home in this game. Justin says Texans have not played a Thursday night game with the new staff. So there you go. So every time we see the first short week Thursday night game for a new staff, it tends to be an underperformance. And you add that into this game where, sure, it's the first Thursday night game for Ulbrich, but he had one 3 weeks ago. It's not going to be new to him. It's also another one that they have at home on the short week. So something to think about as you're looking at that game and getting back for it. Jets Pete says Tennessee is 1-6. What motivation does coaching staff have to win when they're fighting for draft position? Coach staff will very likely be back. That's tough. I could say similar about New England. I guess you see New England trying to trade for guys this week as they feel like they're in a good spot record-wise, which is debatable. I don't know if I'm taken away from that just yet. In that's a tough one to look at. Next game up is the Chargers minus 1.5 with a total of 43 on the road at the Cleveland Browns. I have 43 as the total. I see 42 at FanDuel. I see 42.5 at Heritage. I see 42.5 at ESPN. I see 42.5 at DK minus 113. Chris is 43, as are Circa and Buckeye. So I have 43 in here. Wednesday stream at 9 a.m. Definitely late to the party. Lots of other pros that I respect on the over in this game. I'm going to be on the over in this game as well. And I will also be on the LA Chargers. Have bet both. Minus 1.5 is the price I'm seeing for the Chargers. There is a 1 showing at Chris. There is a 1 showing at Bet Online. And a 1.5 showing at FanDuel and DK as well. If you're looking on where to play those numbers, like the side here on the favorite, like the over in this game as well. So the Chargers offense, as we've talked about the last couple of weeks, continues to open up. And I mean, we're seeing it every week. Incredibly, the last 2 weeks, they don't find a way to get over the total against Denver and against the Chargers. I botched those teams against the Saints and the Panthers. I flipped those around in my head. Those NFC teams are just becoming a bit of a blur. The Chargers have played the last 2 weeks. As I scramble to look at this, the Chargers have played the Cardinals and the Saints. The bottom feeders of the NFC are just getting all mixed up, and we have these cluster. The Chargers have played the Cardinals and the Saints. They had the Broncos out of the bye, correcting the trajectory of the last 3 games. Justin Herbert out of the bye. As we talked about, Greg Roman said he wants more passing, wants to open up the offense, wants to allow Herbert to throw more. That's exactly what we've seen the last 3 weeks, at least 32 attempts per game in each of those a big change. And in the last 4 weeks specifically for pass rate over expectation, the Chargers are one of the few teams that are in a positive pass rate over expectation for the entire game. So it's a big shift for the Chargers offense that we are going to continue to see. They get a Browns defense that is without, very likely, their defensive leader in the middle with JOK, and is likely without Denzel Ward, their best defender at defensive back out wide. That is a big positive for the Chargers offense, which continues to throw the football more. More positives for the Chargers offense is the chance to get back DJ Chark and Quentin Johnston in this game. So it's a chance of a full-strength Chargers offense for the first time, I'm going to say all season, because Herbert went into week 1 with the injury limitations that he suffered in camp. So it's the first time in the season we'll see the Chargers offense healthy. It's a banged-up Browns defense at 2 key spots with 2 key guys missing. And on the other side, it's Jameis Winston, who we know is going to jack up the pass rate over expectation way higher than what we were seeing with Deshaun Watson. It's also a chance that we see the entire Browns starting 5 offensive lineman rotation on the field for the first time this season. And I think everything that the Browns are doing right now makes them more of an over than they have been all season. And so you have 2 teams that I think make for great partners in an over spot in this game. To me, the Chargers with Harbaugh in this matchup, now that they've gone from, we were at 4.5 on the look ahead, and it started getting bet later last week when the Jameis news came through and was official, and then it was leaning, and then you get the result last week, and we're to a point where the Jameis Winston move is impactful, and I agree with it, and it's a big upgrade. I'm not going to argue with that. We're getting to a point now where this has been quite a big bump for Cleveland, and that is a bump that I'm going to bet against in this spot. And so like the side here for the Chargers, like the over as well. New Orleans -7 with a total of 43.5 on the road at the Carolina Panthers. I do not have a take on the side or the total in this game. I will say I was texting with somebody yesterday who's a very good NFL bettor, and they were trying to make the case for the Panthers in this game. I know H-Train is watching in the comments somewhere, and he's going, no, don't do it. Don't do it. Couple things I'll say just to think about if you're looking at this game. The Saints are going to have Derek Carr back in all likelihood. He's coming off the oblique injury. That typically impacts performance at a pretty high level, especially on the deep ball. And so perhaps you get a Saints offense that is more restricted with him than it was in week 1 and 2. That's something to keep in mind when you're laying this many points on the road. You think about what teams have done against Carolina the last few weeks. Carolina has forced teams into playing a lot more up-tempo than they typically do because they can wear down this defensive front and they can move the football very quickly. And so when you start to look at just some of the pace of play numbers for teams against Carolina, you're looking in the 26 to 28 second range for a lot of teams that were operating in the low to mid 30s. Every team speeds up against Carolina, try to wear down the defensive front, run the football, and teams have had success doing it. And so thinking about the Saints now with the O-line healthier, with Carr coming back and being able to get closer to that week 1 and 2 offense we saw with Carr operating it, he's such a good fit for the Kubiak offense. You would think that it leans a little bit more to some tempo on the ground, running the football. Does that bode well for covering a touchdown on the road? Not necessarily, but the explosive plays against Carolina have certainly existed. Now, the counterpoint against this would be, if you're looking for positives in Carolina, is that they're just getting healthier. I mean, from weeks 2 to 7, they had so many injuries on both sides of the football. And even last week, there was a beat reporter. I forget who it was off the top of my head. I mean, you had to scroll on the tweet. You've got your phone and you're scrolling because there's so many names on the injury report. It's going to be much shorter this week, probably as short as we've seen it again since week 1 for the Panthers. And so for a team that's rated as poorly as the Panthers are, at the dead bottom of aggregate ratings, dead bottom of market ratings, if you are getting healthier, that is a positive. But that's something to wait and see what we look at. And so this game, once it's got to 7, which was adjusted up off the card news, there's been no takers really on the Saints at 7 that I have seen anywhere on the board. And I think back to the Broncos last week, there was some obviously news driven by that, but the Broncos were not prevented to be bet. I mean, people still wanted them at 9.5, at 10.5, up to as high as 13 on game day. I mean, they just kept getting bet, and it was early in the week. It was the same thing the week prior. We haven't seen that yet on this game specifically, and we're at Wednesday. So it's a bit of a different market so far for this Panthers game. And I do think that's being driven a little bit by some of the injuries that are being returned to the Panthers and getting a full week of practice in, and then some of the question marks about Carr and the performance dip coming back off of the injury. But all that to say, no opinion on the side nor the total. Miami on the road at the Buffalo Bills. Bills -6 with a total of 49.5. I do see some 50s at Circa and Buckeye, as well as Bet Online, but I see 49.5 at DK, FanDuel, Pinnacle, Chris, as well as a few others as well. So I put 49.5 on the banner. We released the over in this game a 1.5 better than what is currently on the market. Would still definitely lean that way at 49.5, but I think that's important just to note when you're looking at the number and thinking about where we were when we were playing it. It's not an entirely different spot now, but it is a higher number than what we were looking at. The defense for Miami last week, I thought, was incredibly disappointing, especially in the second half. Really liked Miami in that spot. Did well with the side in terms of where it went to. But that was just hopeless for the second half defense of Miami against the Cardinals. They couldn't stop Harrison. They had no answer for McBride. And this is a game that we saw the unit healthy face the Bills earlier in the season and had no answers for them at all. And that was the game where Tua got hurt the first time. That obviously skewed how the second half in that game went. But this is a spot where I don't think the Dolphins have a lot of answers for what the Bills are doing. And Buffalo's offense continues to click. And it's doing it despite playing in 3 consecutive weather games, which I think is suppressing things a little bit. There were 25-mile-an-hour gusts in the Jets game that they played on Monday night against Tennessee. Back in Buffalo, that was a game where there were up to 20-mile-per-hour winds. And then last week in Seattle, there was a bit of rain. There was wind in the high teens. And so they haven't played in ideal conditions in quite some time. When you're looking at the forecast for this game on Sunday in Buffalo, it's clear. There's no wind. This is going to be the best conditions that the Bills have played in since playing indoors at Houston going back 4 weeks. But it's arguably the best outdoor game that they have had all season. And even thinking back to week 1 against Arizona, that was a game that the Bills played and 20-mile-per-hour winds as well, when you think back to that game and how different it was. So there's been a lot of weather games impacting the Bills, and their offense the last 3 weeks is still improving. 6.0, 7.2, and 6.4 yards per play, at least 360 yards of offense in each of those games. And so I think that bodes well for the over. For Miami, we saw them come back with Tua and the offense. Everywhere you look and you hear, I mean, it's night and day with Tua, and that's no surprise going from Huntley into Tua. But we start to think about, like, what should this number be and where should we get to from a total perspective? If you're looking at this matchup and just from a pure closing line model perspective, which has a handful of games, more of them with Tyler Huntley than it does with Tua, you're getting to 45 on this total. And so the Tua upgrade is certainly worth more than a field goal. We saw that in the market last week and how much it was upgraded up. So this is a spot here where even still at 49.5, I think this total is a little bit short, and we see both offenses have a lot of success. A couple comments coming in. Dice is in the chat. He's defending Winnipeg. Great area if you're into hunting and fishing. I agree with that. And I would also say, like, the Clear Lake Golf Course, wildly underrated for prairie golf course rankings in Canada. I don't know why it doesn't get the respect that it deserves. It's probably the flies that just pepper you in June and July. Awesome golf course, I will say. Sadly, the season is way too short. But you're absolutely right that when it comes to all of that, there is no question it is a great area for that too. Few says White Rock to Winnipeg. Have you considered Washington, Warsaw, or Wuhan? No, I'm not going to Winnipeg. Few. I can do a lot of things. I don't want to say never. I don't think I can be a lives in Manitoba guy. We'll see. Too many high school sports rivalries to get me to go across the line against Swan River. James says Saints still missing Shaheed, Carr's favorite target. Fair point. I don't know if you're downgrading Shaheed considerably for missing. Like, not downgrading the offense significantly for him missing. I don't know. We'll see. Is the Winston bump being overpriced? I think we're at that point now, James. I think that's fair. I also question a bit. You get the one game return. I mean, the energy for Cleveland was crazy in that game. Can Jameis and his style replicate that in week 2 of his tenure? Yeah, absolutely. I think there is something to be said. Like, we think about how much the Browns put into that game, and Kyle Hamilton doesn't drop that interception in the fourth quarter, among other things. We're probably talking about the Browns in a much different light than what we are right now, where everything's happy and glorious. That was a game that you get the boomer bust from Winston. Could have looked a lot different. Dallas on the road at Atlanta. Falcons -2.5. Total in this game, 52. Tough to do anything in this spot, given the fact that you don't know the defensive injury status for the Cowboys. I think it's vital to understand if Parsons will be out there and if Bland will be out there. If you have both of those guys not on the field again for the Cowboys, you worry for this defense that just cannot do anything to get off of the field. This is as bad as it's looked in a long time. 7.3 yards per play allowed to the 49ers, who had all of those concerns all week. 7.5 yards per play allowed to the Lions. And the Lions, although they kept running trick plays until the very end and having no linemen eligible, I mean, the Lions took the foot off the gas a little bit in the fourth quarter. The only time that we've seen the Cowboys defense do anything was against Pittsburgh in the QB change game in the end of the Fields tenure. And we saw them look okay against Daniel Jones. They still allowed more than 300 yards against the Giants. But, I mean, Baltimore went up and down the field, 7.6 yards per play. The Saints went up and down the field, 7.7 yards per play. The Browns with Deshaun Watson was another game where it stepped up. So it's been these games where it's like the only time the Cowboys defense has done anything is against two quarterbacks that are no longer starting for their team, or against Daniel Jones and the Giants, who everybody has made look pretty bad all season long. And now it's a game against the Falcons, who, when you think about the Falcons with the dual running backs that they have with Algier and with Robinson, think about what the Saints did running the football, got whatever they wanted. Think about what the Ravens did running the football, got whatever they wanted. Think about what the Lions did running the football, got whatever they wanted. Think about what the Niners did running the football, got whatever they wanted. Like, what's the plan here without those guys to slow down the Falcons offense in what they want to do at like the most basic level of how they want to run their offense? And Kirk Cousins, for all of the criticism that he takes, has strung together some big games against very similar defenses to the style of play that the Cowboys run. If Parsons is back, if Bland is back, okay, it's a different conversation. We start to look at things a different way. Those guys aren't there. I mean, I don't see a lot to slow down the Falcons offense. Now, defensively for Atlanta, this is a spot where they're probably going to be challenged by the Cowboys offense too, because Atlanta has no pass rush. It's not there. If Dak Prescott's comfortable in the pocket and throwing from a clean pocket, he's going to have a lot of success moving the football against this Falcons defense. Dowdle should be back, which isn't really a positive in general, but you have him back after a game against the 49ers where you couldn't run the football. I think that's a positive. And just from the clean pockets, Prescott should be very effective. There is the underlying kind of subjective concern as we see the Diggs Parsons on the podcast this week, just kind of implying that there's almost no leadership in the room, and they perhaps taking jabs at Mike Zimmer as they were praising Dan Quinn in Washington and kind of reminiscing about how great it was with him last year. No, it wasn't, but is that a sign of what's going on behind closed doors? We'll see. There's certainly negatives and concerns about the Cowboys. But again, it's hard to do much until you know what's going on with both of those guys on the other side. And so it's a stay away for me at the moment. The total has been bet up, rightfully so. Just kind of explained why, but waiting to see what's going on with those injuries on the defensive side for the Cowboys. Denver on the road at the Baltimore Ravens. This is now, it's moved quite a bit. It hasn't moved through a lot of keys. It came off of the 8. 9 is irrelevant in the NFL. We're nearly at 10 now. I think this game does get to 10. I like the Ravens at 9.5, but I mean, we are at the edge of what I would run to the bet with the Ravens. But in terms of what we're getting from the Ravens in this spot, it is a shock to the system for the Broncos on both offense and defense. And I think about what the Denver Broncos and Bo Nix have faced in the last couple of weeks in terms of the offense, which, I mean, I'm reading Twitter and it's talking about how Bo Nix all of a sudden is in the same class as Jaden Daniels. If I go back a month, it was all discussions about how Bo Nix could not move the ball down the field and couldn't complete a pass to a wide receiver. So as I'm looking at the Broncos just path here, they come out of the Jets game, which was ugly in the rain. In the Raiders game, there were some concerns too, 290 yards. The Chargers game, when you look at the box score, it looks like the Broncos rebounded and had a good game. The fact is that they were down 23-0, and the 16 points, along with 75% of the offense, came in the fourth quarter in garbage time. So really, you're looking at a Bo Nix-led offense that went 5.5 yards per play against the Buccaneers, who were riddled with injuries, down 3 defensive starters, down 2 starters on the D-line. They put up 5.5 yards per play. For the Broncos, it was 3.3 yards per play against the Jets in the rain. It was 5.0 yards per play against the Raiders. It was what shows as 6.0 yards per play against the Chargers. It was actually 3.2 before garbage time, where Bo Nix has been a garbage time hero. And the last 2 weeks, where he's got a lot of praise, it was 6.4 and 5.5 yards per play against the Saints defense, which can't stop the run, and the Panthers defense, which cannot stop the run and, quite frankly, cannot stop anybody. I think Bo Nix is getting a ton of credit here for performing against a really bad schedule. And now he's going on the road to take on the Baltimore Ravens, coming off of a loss where he is going to be forced to throw the football. Then Baltimore has become a major pass funnel defense. I don't think that's a good thing for Bo Nix, because the Broncos at their core want to run the football. They want to rely on the ground game behind the offensive line. You can bully Carolina up front. You can bully the Saints up front. You can even, to an extent, bully the Chargers and the Raiders up front. But when it comes down to pure drop back scenarios, throwing the football in neutral game states, Bo Nix hasn't shown that against any qualified defense all season long. He's done it against defenses that are hurt and banged up and below average units. Hasn't done it against a good team yet. Is he going to start by doing that on the road against Baltimore? I don't see it. Now, defensively, you think about who the Broncos have faced all season, with the exception of Seattle in week 1. You have Pittsburgh with Justin Fields, no longer the starter. You have Baker Mayfield, who, again, like the Bucs were dealing with so many injuries in that game. It was Aaron Rodgers in the Jets offense in rain. It was Las Vegas with a quarterback who is no longer starting. It was the Chargers with Herbert, good game where they struggled, got down 23-0. And then it's the Saints with Rattler on the short week. It's the Panthers with Bryce Young, who starts because Andy Dalton is in a car crash. You want to talk about winning the schedule lottery? Here it is. And now this defense goes on the road to take on the number 1 offense in football, that's putting up 400 yards a game with ease. I mean, this is a shock to that system as well. So this is a spot here where I like the Ravens on the side. Ian says, will the Ravens be able to generate pressure? They haven't been able to generate pressure against anybody all season. They're 25th in terms of pressure rate so far this season. So can Nix be comfortable in the pocket? Sure. Is he going to have success throwing against this defense? I don't believe so. And I'm going to be curious to see it. Now, an injury note to consider. I believe Nate Wiggins is going to be back. He had the COVID last week, couldn't play. I'd be very surprised if he is not playing. Marlon Humphrey is a key injury to watch for Baltimore in the secondary. Even without Humphrey, I think this is a spot where the Ravens defense handles things. If Humphrey is back, this number has to be 10. So watch his status in practice. He was walking around on the practice field last game, pregame. He didn't practice during the week. Curious to see what his status is going forward, but that would be a big name to watch. I don't know if Deontay Johnson is acclimated into the offense. He's going to be wide receiver number 3. I think it's a great trade for the Ravens, but I'm not looking at that as something that would impact this game on any level. But to your point, Ian, the Ravens haven't been able to generate pressure all season, and they're probably not going to be able to this week as well. Michael has a teaser note. I'm reading this one blind. I didn't screen it, Michael. Let's see what you got. One note: teams coming off emotional road losses coming back home are 6-10 straight up in 2024. 4 of those wins: Chicago beat LA hurt. Okay. San Francisco beat New England hurt. Washington beat Carolina very hurt. LAC beat New Orleans beat up. And so I'm guessing you're applying that to this game with the Ravens coming back in that scenario, if I'm reading that correctly. Interesting point. Good blind comment read in that one. Las Vegas on the road at Cincinnati. Bengals 7 -20 total in this game, 46.5. Lots of asks about the Bengals in teaser legs for this. I would assume they're very popular in teaser. I'm assuming they're very popular in Survivor. I have a very, very, very limited take on both point spread and total. Patrick, good question. Define emotional. I'm curious about that as well, Michael. T. Higgins is massive for the Bengals offense. Like we saw that last week. We've seen it earlier in the season, and it's not necessarily just T. Higgins and his skill by himself. It's just that the Bengals need this wide receiver trio to be on the field to be great. And we saw what happens when he's not out there. The Bengals offense, despite building the lead, couldn't sustain offense in the second half. So his status is massive to watch, and we'll get more news on that probably very shortly coming out from Bengals practice reports. But that's something to absolutely watch on and look at. So that's really my take for the Bengals and what you're looking on offense. If he's in there, the Bengals are going to score against this Raiders defense. If he's not, I think we see the Bengals, again, continue to struggle. And you look at the last couple of weeks, albeit against better defenses, 4.2 yards per play against the Browns, 4.8 against the Eagles, 280 yards and 223 in those spots. You credit maybe the Browns defense a little bit for the historic matchup and how much they've had success against Burrow, but against last week against the Eagles, perhaps it's the Vic Fangio defense coming around and starting to click, but that just shows like how much this offense struggles and how predictable they become when they don't have their full complement of wide receivers outside. For Las Vegas, it's a team I'm really struggling to gauge where they're at. I feel like there was a lot put into that game against the Chiefs, given the buildup and the lead up and the history that they've had with Pierce against that team. And they just get beat up really for 4 quarters in that spot as they're outgained by nearly a yard per play, outgained by more than 100 yards. It was a pretty, in my opinion, poor showing from the Raiders in that game at home that they were building up to be pretty significant. And now they go on the road to take on the Bengals. I don't feel like it's the best spot for them to rebound and to show up again. But I don't have much of a take for where this is. When we look internally at some of the numbers that we have and that we reference, if we're looking at this game from a pure closing line standpoint, just, hey, here's the closing line model for the season. Here's the price. We see Cincinnati -8. Other models that we reference, if we're looking in season, some of them are going to make Cincinnati slightly higher than this, pushing 9. If we look at some of the preseason numbers and priors, this was around Cincinnati -6. So make of that what you will. I just don't have much of a take on this game at all. So we will continue to move on as Patrick's comments still lingering on the show. This is a question. I feel like I'm on the other platform. I've started doing just live stream on TikTok every morning on the RAS Picks account where I'm looking, just having a coffee and hanging out, doing Q&A. And it's just like fantasy question, sit, start, trade, all of this. People love fantasy football. I've never played. I don't know anything about fantasy football. It's a different world to me. And so I do my best to answer some of these on the live stream. And I have no idea on some of the answers that I'm trying to give, but I'm trying to do my best to merge it. And so here's a fantasy question merging over from the other side here on the YouTube live stream. I'll give it a crack, Mike, and we'll continue on with the games. I know you're not a fantasy guy, well classified, but with Kittle on the bye week, do you think Taysom Hill versus Carolina or Schultz versus New York Jets has more success on Sunday? Seems contrarian to start Hill, but I don't hate it. So I think it's a slam dunk to start Hill. So I'm curious why that's contrarian. But I would expect Hill to have a great game. Now, Willie K this is why I'm such a bad perceived fantasy player. Don't start Taysom in fantasy. Just go with Schultz, my friend. When I look at that and I'm thinking more like prop perspective, I would think that Hill with Carr back showed to be a very important part of this offense. And if you're thinking that the Saints follow the same kind of template mentality or that offenses have gone against Carolina, which is tempo and keeping the ball on the ground, to me, it just sets up and screams for a big Taysom Hill game. Now, again, where I struggle with fantasy is weighing what that could look like against what you might get out of Schultz, effectively becoming like wide receiver 1 in that Houston offense, with Dell likely in a very tough matchup. That's what I would look at. Fantasy Pros has Schultz by a landslide. Mike, this is why I don't do it. And this is why I find those TikTok questions interesting, because everybody wants to know about their fantasy team. But when it comes to betting, everyone's like, on that platform. So that's probably a terrible opinion. But again, I have no idea when it comes to fantasy. So let's see. Patrick says price dependent. But obviously, Taysom, anytime touchdown score, will be in the account this week. I would agree with that. I'm with you. Indy at Minnesota. Why are you talking about this game now? Because it was flex, but the rotation order has it where it is, and we're going by rotation in these shows. So the big story that everybody wants to talk about and needs to talk about in this matchup is obviously Anthony Richardson being benched and the Colts taking on Joe Flacco. From a betting perspective, we saw what the market said about this. The Colts are 1 point better with Flacco. The total is 1.5 higher. I believe you have to make the Colts totals as a baseline higher with Joe Flacco, because the pass rate with Flacco so far is about 10% higher in the games that he has started versus the game that Richardson has started. And what you're also seeing for Indy is that the run game with Flacco becomes less effective than the run game with Anthony Richardson. So it kind of encourages Steichen to push the pass game a little bit more. You're going to see Josh Downs be a lot more relevant in the box score in this game. I think you're going to see a lot of attention given to his props when you consider how much more success he's had with Flacco throwing him the football compared to how much success he's had with Richardson throwing them the football, which was skewed a lot by the big catch that he had last week. So that kind of changes how teams are forced to look at and defend the Minnesota offense. There was a question earlier about this game specifically asking, why would you bench Richardson in this game knowing that the mobility factor is going to be important against the Flores blitz? What I would say with that is we think about who Flores and the Vikings have faced the last 2 weeks. It's Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford. Both of those guys had 95th percentile games against the Vikings defense. And nobody thinks about mobility when they think about Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford. The issue that the Vikings defense has is the speed in the secondary, which they have on the field, really struggles to compete with wide receiver speed. So if the pass rush doesn't get home, quarterbacks are able to have success throwing the football because there's not a lot of speed in the defensive backfield anymore for the Vikings. And so what we saw the Lions do with some of their protection adjustments was stealing from kind of the Bill Belichick tree in some games. And it just gives the quarterback an extra half second against this rush. And we see the defense become very vulnerable on the back end for Minnesota. That's something to watch for going forward. When you think about the Colts offensive line, if it plays to its ceiling, it can be one of the better units in the league. Now, the question becomes, is the last 2 weeks of Goff and Stafford performance, which again are 95th percentile games, are these outlier games from quarterbacks having just their best game of the season and a crazy amount of success against this Vikings defense? And you're saying, hey, the Vikings defense has been great for the 5 games prior. We're going to give them the benefit of the doubt that against these two quarterbacks who just went off in these games, that it wasn't an issue. Is it that? Or is it, okay, the Lions showed something, and now all of a sudden you get this style of quarterback and this style of protection. The Vikings are really going to struggle to defend that because of the lack of speed that they have in the back end. And if the rush isn't working, while the gamble isn't paying off for Flores, and this is something we can see teams exploit going forward? I don't know what the answer is for that. And that's, I think, something that needs to be figured out, because you can look at this Vikings defense as being incredibly overrated, or potentially now, as we're starting to see these totals creep up and get bigger numbers, potentially be to the point where maybe they're a little bit underrated when combined with Sam Darnold, who might be taking a bit of a step back on offense after just a red hot start to the season. A lot of noise in this. I don't know what to make of it specifically. And this matchup, like, honestly, when I'm looking at this, I think about the matchup for Darnold in this offense and how wide receivers have had so much success against the Colts, unless it's Huntley throwing the football at them. You would think that there's big play potential here for Darnold with Jefferson. He has struggled more against zone than man this season. You're going to get a ton of zone from the Colts. And so perhaps it's a bend but don't break mentality, stressed a little bit further from Gus Bradley and this Colts defense, and they just try to contain Jefferson, and this turns into a big Aaron Jones game and a TJ Hawkinson game with him returning over the middle. I struggle to try to figure out what you're getting offense-wise, and I don't know when it comes to the Vikings defense what you're looking at just kind of noise-wise the last 2 weeks in those two performances that we saw from both of those two quarterbacks. So I don't know. From the Colts, it's very obvious what we're going to get. It's going to be more passing. It's a higher pass rate. It's Flacco providing a more effective pass option to the Colts. It's a less efficient ground game. And where I struggle with that a little bit is I do think a great way to test this Vikings defense is on the ground, which to me, when I was looking at this handicap earlier in the week, I was like, if the Colts have Richardson and they just go really run heavy in the spot, a lot of RPOs, a lot of Richardson runs, I'm like, to me, that's going to work against this Vikings front. But now they're not going to have that. And I don't think it's going to be a massive effort to get Jonathan Taylor a ton of carries on the ground. I think Flacco's going to do what he does. I say all of that to say I struggle with a side or a total in this game. I don't know. It's a very noisy matchup. Maybe something changes during the week, but I just don't have a lot here to offer or say from the side or the total perspective after the adjustment for Joe Flacco, which some folks in the chat, I saw one or two comments saying that it wasn't enough. I think it's a very fair adjustment. I think it's very fair. A couple comments on this one. Robbie says, KOC has 10 days to dice this up against a weak Indy D. Flacco will throw 45 times. Really like the over in this one. Scott says, Vikings at home look like a steal. Makes me think there must be a trap that I don't see. I would struggle to get to the point they say like a steal. Now, the home point is another one I forgot to reference. You think about Richardson, some of the struggles that he's had going into this environment with likely what needs to be a hard count and all of that. Now that element's taken away from the game. I don't know. What I do know, Washington minus 3.5, 43.5 on the road at the Giants. I do know that this is an over at 43.5. I am very surprised we have not seen this game move yet. I bet the over 43.5 makes a ton of sense to me. In the first game that these two teams played back in week 2, the Commanders didn't punt. The Giants didn't have a kicker. Giants scored 3 touchdowns. The Commanders scored on every single drive, but they never found the end zone. Both teams were over 6 yards per play. It was like 750 yards of total offense. I mean, both teams got whatever they wanted, and that game closed a little bit shorter than this one. I still am wondering 5 weeks later how that first matchup didn't go over, and I'd be very surprised if this one did not go over. The Giants' biggest issue the last couple of weeks where they've really struggled, and folks will point to a lot of different areas they struggled. To me, the biggest issue that they have had has been at the left tackle position where they lost Andrew Thomas. They just don't have a suitable replacement for him. Now, it was 2.2 yards per play against the Eagles, who with that defensive line just gave the Giants a challenge that they couldn't handle. Last week against Pittsburgh in a very good pass rush, the Giants went for 5.9 yards per play against the Steelers, which I thought was a big positive and potentially a sign things are turning around. Now, you look at the grades that come out of PFF, and the left tackle spot graded out as the worst of the week for the Giants. So they still have to figure that out. I don't think Washington is going to be able to test them at that weakness like the Steelers could, like the Eagles could. It's going to look, I think, a lot more stable up front for the Giants offense. I think that's a positive. And when we're thinking about a lower total against this Commanders defense, I think that's a good matchup that bodes well for the over. When I think about the Washington defense, there has been implied improvement the last couple of weeks. You look at some of the scores that they've allowed: 7 points to the Panthers, 15 points to Chicago, 13 points to Cleveland, 14 points to Arizona. It's like, okay, this offense is starting to find things and click a little bit. Here's what I will say. If we're starting to give the Commanders defense a little bit of respect and upgrade them, I mean, think about who they have played here for quarterbacks the last couple of weeks. You get the Bears offense out of the bye that was a no-show. You get the Panthers offense that was a complete no-show. You get the Browns with Watson. The one time they faced a decent defense, it was the Ravens in the last month. And Baltimore put up nearly 500 yards of offense and 7.5 per play. And so I don't think this is a Commanders defense that can be like an average defense in the league. I think it is a bottom-tier defense. I think the Giants secondary is a bottom-tier defense. And I look at this total at 43.5, and I don't buy into the fact that two defenses at this level can be priced lower than an average total in the NFL. And that's 3 minutes into this breakdown, and I haven't talked about the Washington offense and what it has been doing: 6.7, 6.7, 6.7, 6.7 yards per play the last 4 weeks. I mean, I haven't even mentioned that. So there you go. So that is where I like the over in this total at 43.5. I'm surprised it hasn't been bet yet. I really am, as I'm looking at this. Robbie, your comment's still on the chat. We've had 13 comments come in the last couple of weeks. Ryan says, does the viewpoint change if Tracy Jr. doesn't play? It does not. For me in this one. Mike D, you love the Giants team total unders at home. So give me, I'll support you in this and say, I'm guessing they're 17 this week for their team total. Give them 17 points, give the Commanders 27 for the over in this one. Will that be sufficient for your breakdown? Dice says Chateau Whistler is a nice golf course. We can't put Whistler in the category of Clear Lake and Dakota Dunes and Royal Regina golf clubs. We can't get into that level. Dice. If you want to go that way and say like Waskasoo and you want to get in a comparison, okay, we'll get there. But we can't be shoving Chateau Whistler into the prairie golf conversation, considering the location. It looks like I'm having a pint of stout, but I'm doing the ice shaken espresso at home on the stove. So that's why it looks like it does, before anyone comments. Chicago pick at Arizona, total 44.5. No take side, no take total. I do believe we see over money impact this game and push the total up between now and kickoff. That would be my sense at 44.5. I'm not sure what happens with the side. I've heard contrasting viewpoints from two people that I really respect. One likes Chicago, one likes Arizona. That's probably why we are at where we are at with this number. Things to watch for Chicago: starters in the secondary, Brisker and Gordon. What is their status going to be for this game? I think that's extra important against Arizona, given where they defend the field, where we saw Harrison starting to run routes, where McBride has been very successful over the middle. This is a Cardinals team in general. I would say if you're just thinking about base totals for teams, getting to probably anywhere less than 47, 46.5 with Arizona is a bit of a stretch. And so if you're handicapping this total, I mean, Arizona's doing their part for the over in this game, and they have really the last 4 weeks at all games above average in yards per play. They've been mid 300s, all of those games as well. If Chicago's down guys, you're going to see the Cardinals continue to move the ball through the air like they did last week. I think part of it was a Harrison squeaky wheel game last week. He was complaining in the presser. I think part of it, too, was just figuring out how to use him. You saw his route tree last week change quite a bit. And I think that's going to be something that evolves going forward. It opens up a lot for McBride as well, who's just awesome when he's back, and now he's finally healthy again. So to me, Arizona's doing their part in the over. The question is, what do you get from the Bears offense? I really don't know. Last week was so damning to me for Chicago because I was looking at what they were doing, and it was like, okay, you have a good offensive game against the Rams. You have a great offensive game against the Panthers. You have a great offensive game against the Jags. Washington's defense was in that same category as LA, Carolina, and Jacksonville. Chicago, out of the bye, I mean, was set up to have a great game against the Commanders' defense, and they put up 5.1 yards per play, and it's aided by garbage time to get over 300 yards. No show when it matters most early in the game. I don't know. I struggle with this Bears offense. If you're expecting them to be what they were for the 3 weeks pre-bye, I think you're looking at 44.5 as a very short total. If you think they're closer to what they were last week, which was reflective of the first 3 weeks of the season, I think you're looking at this total that's probably right. And I would guess that you're leaning towards Arizona at a pick. And that's kind of, to me, the breakdown of this game is just trying to project what you're getting from Chicago is what you're going to see in this. So, man, I wish I knew, because if you could give me a glimpse of what you're going to see from Chicago on offense in this game, which I'm struggling to find, I would probably have a strong take on the side, but I don't know what to expect in this game, and that's probably enough of a breakdown to look at this one on this game. Robbie's comment just does not want to go away from the live stream. There we go. Next game up, LA Rams -2, 48.5 on the road at Seattle. This is far and away the most excited I have been to watch a football game of any matchup all season long. That does not include the New York Jets in the first week or two of the season. I think this game is going to be awesome. I can't wait to watch this. This is going to be great. In terms of betting, I'll say what we have. We have the over in this game. We released it earlier in the week. I am curious to see how high this side goes, because I could see myself possibly intrigued if it gets to the 3 for betting Seattle with the points at home. There's been a lot of respected money on the Rams side so far that has been pushing this number out. Obviously, the upgrade with Nakua and Cutback is big for the Seahawks, or the Rams offense, pardon me. And we're seeing a big adjustment. This was -3 for the Rams, or this was -3 for the Seahawks on the look ahead. We're now 5 points difference off of the 3 through the 0 to 2. You think about, say, Godwin and Evans last week, a wide receiver duo being in versus out was a 4.5 point movement. Kupp and Nakua being in effectively is exceeding that benchmark for the improvement, as well as potentially just the momentum for the Rams coming out of that win. So, I mean, we're pushing the boundaries here of like, how big of an improvement are you going to look at? Now, a lot of that is obviously impacted by DK Metcalf. Massive for this game. I want to point out Greg at Coach Speak Index, an account that I love to follow on Twitter. He had a tweet yesterday, I believe, and it was referencing the Mike Macdonald presser on Monday. Mike Macdonald said he was optimistic about DK Metcalf playing in this game. And Greg did a great job finding 5 other instances so far in the Mike Macdonald head coaching tenure of the Seahawks where he referenced a player as being optimistic to play that week. All 5 players played that week. So the optimistic tag from Mike Macdonald so far in his short tenure as the Seahawks head coach has been very telling that the guy is going to play that week. If you tell me that DK Metcalf is back and he's near 100% in this game, and I look at the offensive line for Seattle, which could very well get back George Fant and Abe Lucas up front, which would just be a huge boost for this offensive line, which has had issues all season long protecting Geno. I think Seattle's going to look pretty good in this game on offense. I certainly think the Rams offense is going to look good as well. I do question now with the Seahawks defense, with Witherspoon healthy, with Woolen healthy, with Brown healthy, with Ernest Jones inserted into the middle, if this now becomes the repeat of last year. I think back to Mike Macdonald last year with the Ravens. They added a middle linebacker in Roquan Smith. I am not trying to put him at the same level as Ernest Jones IV. So don't jump on me for that one. But I just think, like, scheme-wise for Macdonald, he knows very specifically what he wants. It was a trade that came across the feed It was kind of like, why? And it's like, oh yeah, Mike Macdonald. He's kind of building things into what he wants. It was a very similar timing for the trade with the Ravens too. And I just wonder if this was kind of the piece now with everybody coming back healthy that Macdonald wants to have get into his defense as he's trying to get that identity sorted and fixed. That's dealt with a lot of injuries for the majority of the season. And perhaps the Seahawks defense is a little bit underrated, not considering that, but just numbers wise based on some of the offenses they have faced while they've been dealing with all of these injuries. And if that's a sign of things to come, I think that makes a bit of a case for Seattle too. So to me, though, I'm looking at this. I think this is a game where the weather is no longer a concern like it looked at earlier in the week, where we see points from both sides. I think this is going to be a very fun back and forth game. I think it's going to turn into a shootout. I'm curious to see how high this side goes and what we get to. I desperately wish I was able to attend this game. I mean, of any game that I could go to, never mind that it's very close to where I live, in the games that you're going to watch this year from just a fan perspective, if you gave me the full schedule preseason and you can have me circle a game, this is one of the top 2 or 3 circles on the entire schedule. I mean, this is going to be awesome to watch. And something else that I would say, if you have time today and you're bored and you want to go back, Sean McVay did a sit-down interview with The Athletic in July. And the look on his face referencing this matchup against Mike Macdonald and the Macdonald defensive scheme said it all. And it was back and forth a little bit in a friendly, competitive way. I mean, this is elite offensive play caller against elite defensive play caller with Geno Smith, who's probably the most underrated quarterback through 8 weeks so far, against the Rams defense that has been improving, but a Rams defense that might have a little bit of noise in that improvement as well. I love everything about this game. It's going to be awesome to watch. I'm curious if we see a 3. Would change my opinion on the side. I'm curious to see about the defense or the total as well and where we get to. Spencer says, any concerns for the Seahawks O-line against LA front that's starting to round into form? The Rams made some scheme changes pre-bye. It's certainly showing through. But again, the big thing here is Seattle could very well get back their 2 best offensive linemen this week who haven't played this season. And so it could be a very different looking Seahawks offensive line for the first time this year. But when you're talking about Geno under pressure, Geno's been under pressure for every minute of every game all season, it seems like, and has performed incredibly well navigating pressure in the pocket. So this is going to be a fun matchup and injury report. I don't know how much that Seahawks offensive line improvement is being factored in to this number, if at all. This just seems like one-way traffic for the Rams offensive improvement the last couple of weeks. So this is going to be a fun one to watch, and that injury report is going to have a lot. Gerard says, sadly, my Seahawks seem lost right now. DK should be back. I agree with you that he should be back as well. I don't believe that Stafford has ever lost to the Seahawks since he's been quarterback for the Rams. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one, but I believe that Stafford is undefeated against Seattle in his Rams tenure. Detroit 3 -20 at Green Bay. This is kind of a tough game to talk about because we obviously don't know what's going on with Jordan Love entirely yet. Here's what I'll say numbers-wise. This was pick'em when Love was expected to be in. When Love went down the first time with injury, there was a 6-point adjustment. And there was discussion, is that too much? And it even turned into a bit of a bigger adjustment by the time we got to kickoff was it the Titans game, or the Titans game was the second week? Whatever the week 2 game was. It turned out to be a little bit more of an adjustment. The adjustment in this game, in my opinion, cannot be as big as the adjustment the first time for what we saw for Malik Willis, because we know a lot more about Malik Willis in this offense than we did then. There is nobody watching this right now that would believe that Malik Willis is as bad as they thought Malik Willis was before Malik Willis started in week 2. Completely different. Malik Willis is not great. I'm not saying that at all. But we know what the Packers offense looks like with him, and it's relatively competent. It is an offense that is functional and not non-functional like it was probably expected to be in week 2. And so the adjustment cannot be as big as it was in that first injury when Love went out and Willis came in. So we would never get back to Lions -6, in my opinion. I think a bigger question is if Love is out, does this go Lions -4.5? If Love is in, knowing that he's not 100%, knowing that it could be a bit of a wet surface, knowing that he has a groin injury, and knowing that that's problematic and the re-injury risk is high, I mean, we probably can't get back to a pick 'em either. So we're at Lions 3 -20, which to me is like a 65% hedge towards Love not playing, maybe slightly less than that. And I think we see Love in, Lions -1.5, Love out, Lions -4.5. That's my take and gauge on what we're going to get to. Maybe that gauge with Love in is a touch short for where it could be, and maybe it goes back to like a Lions -1 or something like that. But I think that's the range that we are playing in for this from the side. When I think about the total, the big thing that stands out to me is, are we seeing the Lions defense start to fall off without Hutchinson? Against the Minnesota Vikings, they allowed 7.4 yards per play and 383 total yards. Last week against the Tennessee Titans, they allowed 6 yards per play and 416 yards. It is hard to ignore, despite the Lions winning both of those games, how different the defense has looked. And there's a part of me that kind of gets the impression that the Lions are winning some of these games comfortably and by such big margin, that the defensive struggles that they have and are starting to show in the absence of Hutchinson, and even a little bit before, are kind of being ignored a little bit, or at least not spotlighted enough, that we might see that continue to trend the wrong way and be a bit of an issue. And that injury, as we know, was incredibly impactful when he went down. So I'm curious to know in this matchup, where, again, the Tennessee Titans with Mason Rudolph and Calvin Ridley is a lesser version, definitely, of a Packers offense with Malik Willis and the quartet of wide receivers that he has to throw to, as well as the play caller and scheme designer of Matt LaFleur, compared to what you're getting from Brian Callahan. I mean, the Titans are not on the level that the Packers would be with this unit. And we even saw that a bit in the first matchup between those two teams. So what does the offensive expectation become for the Packers, even if it is Willis? Against, to me, what is the big concern in this game is the Lions defense. And I think that's a problem going forward. So what I think I'm going to do in this game is later on in the week, as this goes, in the comment section down below in the video, I'm going to start posting some updated thoughts on games. I know there were calls from folks to do Saturday and Sunday live streams. I think I'm going to keep those to just really impromptu and light live streams that I'll do on the channel or over on the TikTok account. But what I'll do is in the comment section, I'll post some updates on Friday and Saturday as I do my bigger write-ups, and I'll have some more updated thoughts on these. And I'll maybe get to including a prop or two as well if it stands out, and I'll pin it in the comment section down below. And so between now and Sunday on kickoff, if you do have questions or you want updated thoughts on the games and you want to leave something in the comment section, not only will I get to that, but I'll post some updates on this as well that go beyond the podcast, which ends for the week on Friday morning. So I'll use this comment section on the video as an update if it works for everybody. And I'll have some more thoughts on this game as well as the Seahawks game we just talked about. So nothing right now on any of these, but I'll have some updates as we go. Sean says, what are your thoughts on the Lions and specifically Goff being team that benefits greatly from positive game script? Only game they didn't start ahead this year is Tampa Bay. Does this affect your handicap? That's a good point. I honestly, Sean, I haven't thought like too much about that specifically for the context of the Lions. My first thought that I have in reading your question and thinking about it is in that Buccaneers game, I want to say the Lions were in the red zone 8 times, might have been 7, and they converted one of them. So that was a pretty noisy game of its own. It makes sense that the Lions would benefit from being in a very positive game script because of how their offense operates with their O-line and the running backs being the strength of it. What I will say has been incredibly impressive from the Lions so far is when you think about some of these games for Jared Goff this season, he's been great. Don't get me wrong. But some of these games that they are winning and winning by massive margin, like you think about the Seahawks game where they put up 42 points in a absolute shootout and Goff had 19 pass attempts. Like that's a special team and a special offense to do that. Even against Dallas and Minnesota, where they scored into the 30s, they're north of 7 yards per play. They're right around 400 yards of total offense. He's attempting like 24, 28 passes. So they've had a lot of very big offensive outputs this season when Goff hasn't had to do much in terms of attempts and throwing the ball, which makes sense to what you're saying game script wise. As I'm talking this out loud and thinking about it, I think back to what year was that? 2022, 2023 Super Bowl, like late, like January, February 2023, if I have it right. The Chiefs Eagles, if I'm getting my years right and not mixed up. We played the over very big in that Super Bowl. And the reason that we did it a lot with the Chiefs, but the Eagles were a team that were very similar to what you're describing with the Lions, where they were never pushed, especially in December and January. Like it was really comfortable games. The offense wasn't pushed. They didn't have to chase. And we felt like there was a chance that they would have to chase in the Super Bowl and that the totals that they had were suppressed with that. We're not seeing suppressed totals with the Lions because of how much their offense has benefited from the ground game and how well they've performed overall. I wonder in games where we see them, if they don't have the script and they are pressed, and maybe we get to a point where Lions totals are like 46, 47, that's probably the opportunity where it becomes something in handicapping that you would want to bet on. Because I would love to see what happens, to your point. What does the Lions offense look like that's putting up 400 plus yards when they're comfortable? Like if they're pressed and they need to do something, do we see their tempo, which is in the mid 30s, jump to the high 20s? Do we see a more aggressive play action and passing game? What does that look like? And so that would be interesting to see. And I know against that Bucs game, Goff threw it 56 times. That was more scheme driven than I think trailing driven because the Bucs had so many defensive injuries. So long answer, but that's kind of what I would think about when you get to the Lions and what you're looking at for this. And you said the 22 Eagles are exactly my comparison for the Lions, and a great point. So I'm glad I thought of that on the spot. So that's good to know. I'm curious to see. That's a good point that you bring it up. We'll have to see games where the Lions might be pushed if we get a very different offense. Because again, I'm looking right now. Goff attempts this season: 21 or 27, 56, 23, 19, 26, 25, 19. So one of those numbers is not like the others. It's more than double his other highest in that Bucs game. So, something to circle for sure. Jacksonville, Philly. Not a lot to say here. We're at Eagles 7.5. Perhaps it should be a tick higher. The Jags are sellers. You could also look at that as them kind of waving the white flag on the season, perhaps. There's injuries all over the place here for Jacksonville. I'm shocked that they made the trade for Robinson. I don't get it. That's a win for Minnesota without Darisaw now at the left tackle position. A big win for Minnesota in that trade, in my opinion. But I think about this Jags team going on the road here. No Christian Kirk. He's gone for the season. Gabe Davis should be in. Brian Thomas allegedly is going to play. We'll see what comes of that. Just a cluster group of injuries that I think is going to be problematic. Perhaps it was made out to be a little bit worse earlier in the week, as there was a lot more doubt about Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis. There was a bit of a messy injury report where it was reported that it was a 2 to 4 week injury, and then he came out, Thomas did, and said he was fine. Either way you look at this, there's probably a performance drop for him. Don't know what you're getting out of Gabe Davis necessarily, but he should be good to go based on early reports so far this week. So we'll see what happens from this. The adjustment up, we talked about it on the Sunday live stream. I'm like, this shouldn't be Eagles minus 6.5 with all the injuries and the concerns, and now the trade. 7.5 with both of those guys trending back towards playing seems right. The total at 46 has been bet under. It was as high as 48 earlier in the week. Pros played that under that I know. We saw that come down. It is now 46. I think that's a fair total for this game. I don't have any more thoughts with this. If anything changes, as I mentioned, I will drop it in the comment section down below as the week goes on. But just not a lot that I can offer here from in terms of matchups or questions in this one. We see questions as the Eagles being such a teaser anchor. Mike D will know the stats on this. Home favorites this year for teasers, I think, have been really poor. I want to say it's below 50%. Something to keep in mind, I guess. The dogs for teasers have been much more of an advantage play than going for the favorites teased down. But Mike will comment he'll put it in the comments down below and the live chat. I know he's watching. Before we get to the live game, if you're enjoying the live stream preview, if you're enjoying the content that's put out on the channel, if you're enjoying the podcast as well, it's uploaded every morning at 5 a.m. Eastern, 2 a.m. Pacific time. Would encourage you to subscribe down below to the channel. Would love to have you on the channel. You get notifications for new videos. Be able to keep in touch with everything going on. If you've enjoyed the live stream so far and you want to hit the thumbs up, there's a button down below. We got to 9,500 viewers 2 weeks ago. We got to 8,900 viewers last week. Curious to see if this number can be in that same range as well. It's unfortunate that the live stream has aired to the biggest audience the last 2 weeks in what has been the 2 worst weeks of the season. But that is very much how it goes. Anytime, I thought about this the other day, 17 years I've been doing some form of write-ups, handicapping, or betting that has come with an element of promotion. Anytime that there's a bump in traffic or a promotion, it's just Murphy's Law. It seems like things don't go right. And I'm not saying that's why things did not go right, but it is just, it happens every single time, it seems, where there's a big spike and then things fall off and trail down. And that's just, it's frustrating that the last 2 weeks have gone as they were. Obviously, folks following the service are disappointed as well. So hopefully week 9 proves to be a turnaround and a good run through the month of November into December. Let's wrap it up with the final game on the board. Tampa Bay on the road at the Kansas City Chiefs. Chiefs -9. Total in this game is 45.5. I see 8.5 at DK, 8.5 at FanDuel, 8.5 at Pinnacle. But Chris, Circa, and Buckeye are all at 9, which is I have 9 in the graphic. This game was bet over yesterday. We saw the total tick up. And we're now up to a high of 46 from a opening price earlier in the week of 44.5. This game is entirely predicated around whether or not the Chiefs defense can sustain play defending the middle of the field against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That is, without a doubt, the most important matchup that we are going to see in this game. The Kansas City Chiefs all season have struggled to defend tight ends. And I just want to pull up the Raiders box score to see. I feel like Bowers mattered, but I don't actually have the number off the top of my mind. 5 receptions, 5 targets, 58 yards, was not as impactful. They did a reasonably good job of slowing down Bowers last week. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense last week shifted because of the injuries to the wide receivers. And when I think about what they want to do now with Cade Otton and tight ends kind of becoming the focal point of this offense, it in theory goes against the weakness of what the Chiefs have on their defense. My question in this is, what we saw last week was the Buccaneers debuting effectively their new offense. It was against a common opponent that they have seen. When you look at the numbers, 6 yards per play, 432 yards, Baker threw it 50 times, and he was accurate and effective. We know Baker Mayfield, when operating out of heavier personnel, when he has time to throw, is going to be an effective passer. It happened in Cleveland. It's happening in Tampa Bay. It's what he's comfortable with and what he does well with. Now, what I want to point out here is not only was there the curveball element that was a nice advantage for the Bucs to have in a divisional rematch that was played so close to each other, just 4 weeks apart, it gave them a nice advantage in spite of the issues that they had losing their top 2 wide receivers. I don't want to say it made them better. I'm not saying that, but it made it a lot harder for Atlanta to game plan for them, whereas most teams in these divisional rematches that happen so close to each other are effectively game planning to stop what burned them the first time. And you typically see an overperformance against that, which is why usually you see these game twos trend under, because it's typically a defensive adjustment in these round two divisional games played closely together to take away the offense and what burned them in the first game. We obviously saw Evans and Godwin in the first game do very well. So for Atlanta, it was kind of like a switch for them and what they had to figure out what to do. I think that led to why the Bucs had success. Something else that led to being pretty fortunate in this matchup is the Falcons' pass rush is the worst in the NFL. So you think about Baker Mayfield being in the pocket and being comfortable and all of a sudden introducing this new offense. It was a pretty friendly game plan and environment to do it against, especially against a defense that he's already seen before and had success against earlier in the season as well, although it wasn't like a super dynamic passing game. So it was like a lot of things working in favor of the Bucs offense to find some success in that game, and it was kind of like a natural adjustment. It's going to be a lot different against Kansas City. They're now facing a defense that has an incredibly strong pass rush. The Chiefs are going to be able to disrupt the game for Mayfield in the pocket, whether they have extra protection or not up front, just like we saw the Kansas City Chiefs do against the Saints. I think about that game on Monday Night Football and how much they were able to impact Derek Carr in kind of a similar offense when you think about how the Saints operate, even though they were dealing with some banged up pieces. But you think the Saints offensive style, similar to the 49ers offensive style, and like Spags has so much familiarity defending that style of offense, which is what the Bucs are kind of transitioning into. It seems like a spot where we just see the Chiefs defense win for Kansas City consistently throughout the game. Like this to me now is such a big change for Cohen to make and take on the road against the Chiefs compared to what he did last week. I think that's going to be tough. You want to point to another game where the Chiefs defense had success against a similar system? Well, they just saw something similar against San Francisco, and that changed as well. In addition to that Saints game, even the Chargers to an extent, when you think about that game with the wide receivers down and how the Chargers want to play, like it's similar. Like the Chiefs have seen it. They saw it against Baltimore as well. I think Tampa Bay struggles to move the football. Now, the Bucs have been like a dead over team the last 5 weeks. They've played the last 5 games over. Their offense has been north of 6 yards per play every time. They've conceded as much as 9.4 yards per play to the Ravens. They're giving up nearly 400 yards a game in this span. I mean, the defense has really underperformed. And if this is a game where the Chiefs offense improves a little bit because they introduce Hopkins a little bit more into the offense, no matter where we look with Kansas City, they're finding ways to manufacture points every single week. And to me, it's an offense that's continuing to trend better and improve, even though the numbers haven't quite matched that from a per play and a yardage perspective. You're looking at a little bit of noise in that, as the Chiefs have been 26, 28, 27 points the last 3 weeks, but they have at least 340 yards in all of those games. I point back to the Chargers game too. They have 17 points on the scoreboard. That was a game, again, you have the red zone struggles. You have the turnover near the end zone. The same thing happened against the Saints with the pick in the end zone. So there's been some hidden points for the Chiefs despite the yardage output and going through all of these changes on offense. And now they're getting, I would say, the best offensive team total or over defense that they have faced in the last month on the other side back at home. So this certainly stands out to me for a spot where I think the Chiefs offense has a lot of success. Something else that I would say for this is it's a night game at Arrowhead. We've talked about this on the podcast before. There's some decent data on it. No stadium and no environment in the NFL has more dropped passes than Arrowhead Stadium during night games, and this is going to fit into that criteria. So you think about what could potentially be a challenge for the Buccaneers and the offense on the road. This certainly sounds like one of those spots as well. And so I think we see the Buccaneers offense take a big step backwards from what they did against the Falcons now that it's out there and they've seen it, and it's something that Spags has had success defending. I think we see the Chiefs have a big game on offense as well. So take that for what it is worth in this matchup as you are looking at it. Couple comments to finish. Rudy says Bucks are going to put up some points. I disagree with that one personally. I don't think that is going to happen. Barry looked up the Texans stat. Someone else already confirmed this, Barry. That was in 22. That would have been before the D'Amico Ryans crew took over. Ryan Sherlock says Hopkins over props. I have no idea what the number is. We'll see. Changing 500. Here we go. If you think there are 3 to 4 enticing teaser legs available, would you play them all together in one teaser, 3 leg plus 165 or 4 leg plus 265, or play a round robin 2-team teasers at minus 110 each at a lesser unit side? If you tell me I could get 6.2 team teasers in a round robin at minus 110, I would definitely be doing that, which in turn implies everything else you're commenting there. But 6 pointers, basic strategy, minus 110 is always going to be a good bet. No question about it. So that's what I would do in that. All right. Any last questions before we wrap up here on the live stream? We go for 90 minutes. That's what happens when you take more questions, but I would love to answer more questions as we go. I've really enjoyed the Q&As that I've been doing the last week and a half here over on the TikTok platform. I know we got away with it here on the live stream as I've been trying to do more presentation and turn this into something that it necessarily wasn't last week, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode and enjoyed the show. I was able to answer a lot of questions. Dustin says, where are you getting 2-team teasers at minus 110? It's a good question for sure. And Vince says, and to add to that, if the Chiefs really need their defense to beat teams, it's kind of laughable. Actually, is that a dig at the Chiefs? I don't know what that looks at. All right. That will do it for me today, guys. Have a fantastic Wednesday. Enjoy the rest of the week. Have a fantastic week as well. I hope that we see a bounce back week number 9. Few sides, few totals referenced here on the show, but I will do an update again later in the week in the comments. So if you want to come back and check out the comment sections Friday night, Saturday morning, Eastern or Pacific time, I'll do some updates in there and kind of keep it going and keep it more interactive. Wayne, we talked about the Saturday or Sunday show a little bit earlier. I don't know if I'm going to push it and do another one here on the YouTube channel right now. I do feel like I'm missing a ton of traffic potentially on Sunday morning. I don't know if I can offer a whole lot that would be different from here on the show that I do every Wednesday. But what I'm going to do is going forward in the comment section of this video, I'll pin a comment later in the week with just updated thoughts. Maybe there's some props or things to look at as well that come up as we get into Saturday and Sunday. So before you watch the games on Sunday, if you want to jump back and look at the comment section, I'll pin it to the top. I'll have it pinned there by like Saturday at the latest, like lunchtime, my time, and the Pacific time. So like mid-late afternoon Eastern time. I'll have a comment pinned up here below the video, and you can reference that for any updates or anything that showed up during the show or anything that I saw later in the week or updated my stance on. And I think if I'm going to be doing any live streams on the weekend for now, I'm just going to do kind of the impromptu ones over a coffee that I've started doing over on the TikTok platform. You don't necessarily need to go over there if you don't want to. All the information that I typically talk about over there makes it over here as well. I know people are kind of iffy about the platform, so don't feel like one is significantly different than the other. We're just pushing things out to a new audience. Would love it if you jump over there as well. But don't feel like you're necessarily fully missing out if you're not on both and always looking at every single thing as well. So I'll do an updated comment here on the post down below, and that will be up there by Saturday, late afternoon at the latest. Jacob says, have you ever been to Circa Stadium Swim? I've been to Circa a bunch. Stadium Swim is not my favorite. Love Circa. Love the Asian restaurant. I think that's honestly, if you told me I could go to any restaurant in Las Vegas, if you just put me on the spot and you said you can eat anywhere, I would go to Golden Steer, number 1. I would go to Naked City, number 2. And that would flip because it would depend what I want to eat. If it's a steakhouse night, Golden Steer. If it's any other night, I'm going to Naked City for wings. But 8 East at Circa, my goodness, the brisket fried rice, the wings, the beef jerky. Oh, what a meal. I mean, in that place, I don't know. People seem to go to Circa and they don't find their way into that corner to go to the restaurant. It is so damn good. I couldn't recommend that place enough if you're going there. And I would have the audacity, because people are going to crucify me for this one. If you told me I could go to Barry's or I could go to 8 East, I would pick 8 East 9 out of 10 meals. That's what I would do personally. And that's probably an outrageous take. But that's how I would look at that. So stadium swim's not for me. I would much rather have a pint of mango cart from the long bar and watch in the sports book than I would out by the pool personally. But I know lots of folks love that. It's not my favorite spot to be out by the pool watching the games. I like the indoor environment with easy access to the pints of mango cart at the long bar a little bit better. Rudy says he's too old for TikTok. You'd be surprised. The average viewer age, I'll put this in perspective. The average age of viewer here on a YouTube live stream is 56 years old. The average listener and downloader on my podcast is 52 years old. The average viewer of our TikTok videos and live streams so far is 41. So it does skew younger, but YouTube and podcast always tend to skew older demographic-wise. And then TikTok is skewing far older than I expected it to. It's just massive. There's such a huge audience out there. That's a very different audience. But I'm blown away at the reach that you have on that platform. And I think there's just some bad perceptions about it as well. Scott Cope says, I'm 53, so I'm a young spring chicken. You are squarely in the demographic that this show caters to. So that is good to know as well. All right. That'll officially do it for me. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. Enjoy the week. We'll chat to you bright and early tomorrow morning on the podcast.